a parish coordinator who once asked me to redesign her daughter's reception on a shoestring. I asked careful, service-oriented questions. Do you need us to adjust headcount? Should we hold rain plan A rather than B? Would the family prefer less press visibility this month? The answers came back tilted and brief. Not a good week. They're overwhelmed. Something private. The sky answered louder. On the day the calendar finally went blank, no fittings, no cake consults, no anything, the city woke to rain that seemed to have forgotten how to stop. Fat drops, relentless. Traffic slowed. Umbrellas flipped inside out. Storefront awnings sagged under the weight. I was in the warehouse reviewing chargers and stemware when my phone buzzed. A text from Lydia, the parish coordinator. You were asking about the Fairmans. They're at St. Bartholomew's this morning. It's a funeral. Whose? I typed, then erased it. Instead, thank you. Do you need anything? Extra ushers? She called me, voice low, as if the rain itself were eavesdropping. It's the baby, she said. Clara's little girl. For a second, I thought she had the names wrong. The quiet woman in the navy cardigan from the sunroom. Celeste's sister, who wasn't involved. That Clara. My mind pulled up the image of her hands folded in her lap. The way she'd asked nothing and taken note of everything. The air in the warehouse felt colder. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. I didn't know Clara, but grief has a shape your body recognizes even at a distance. I shouldn't. I know you're not family. Lydia hesitated. But you asked about schedules, and well, they were heading to your kind of event a minute ago. We set the program, and during the prelude, before the hymn, someone heard the mother. Celeste's mother? Another pause. She said something unkind? What do you mean? I kept my voice even. Lydia doesn't gossip. If she was breaking her own rule, it wasn't for sport. She leaned over, Lydia said, and told Clara, at the front, mind you, where the tiny casket was. She told her, at least now you can focus on your sister again. She needs you. I closed my eyes. The sound in my ear wasn't the rain anymore. It was a kind of static, the brain shorting around a sentence that shouldn't exist. I'd seen difficult mothers, performative mothers, the brand of matriarch who mistakes her daughter's wedding for a personal recoronation. I'd never heard of a woman framing a child's death as a scheduling convenience. I shouldn't have told you, Lydia said quickly. Please, keep this between us. I just thought, you planned their wedding. If anything seems off, it's not you. It's not you, I repeated softly. It was a strange comfort, but it landed. Thank you, Lydia. I won't repeat it. We hung up. I stood there with the racks of glassware ticking faintly as they settled, rain like 1,000 feet on the roof. Somewhere across town, a white coffin was being lifted by men who knew how to carry unbearable things. Somewhere in a front pew, a mother had turned grief into a bullet and fired it point blank. I went back to my desk and did what I always do when something threatens the shape of a wedding. I worked the problem. I pulled the master timeline forward on my screen, slid milestones like chess pieces, opened a contingency folder I usually reserved for hurricanes and protests. If the family wasn't going to tell me what was happening, I would plan for what their behavior meant. Guests might be tense. Vendors might get spooked. Press might sniff a story if whispers spilled outside the nave. And the bride, Celeste, would either cling harder to the fantasy or go dark to protect it. Both possibilities required different choreography. At noon, the assistant finally emailed. We need to transition all outdoor elements to Plan B for the ceremony and post-ceremony on account of weather. Also, please confirm the doves will be trained to release indoors if necessary. Indoors. Doves. I read the email twice. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the warehouse windows, long and low, like the world refusing to joke along. I typed back. We can move the harpists to the East Gallery and shift the receiving line to the ballroom. Doves cannot be released indoors. We'll replace with a lantern moment if desired. My team will send revised renders by 5 p.m. Please confirm final headcount for the rehearsal dinner by end of day. Celeste's mother replied instead of the assistant. Headcount unchanged. We cannot have anything that reads funereal. Keep things bright, celebratory. No lanterns, they're dreary. F. No lanterns, not even the symbolic kind, the ones brides use to honor absent grandparents or beloved pets. A family had walked out of a church that morning, and the only instruction I received was no funerals in the optics. I printed the email and filed it in my red tab, the color I use for decisions that will age badly. Maybe I'm superstitious. Maybe it helps to have a physical reminder of the moment the story turned. In the afternoon, I had a walkthrough with the venue manager. We reviewed load-in routes, discussed where the harpists could plug in without overloading the circuits, walked the backup ballroom while water ran down the windows in gleaming sheets. The manager, a lean woman with a calm I envy, stopped in front of the grand staircase and lowered her voice. "You're with the Fairmans, right?" she asked. "Yes." She made a face that wasn't quite a wince. "We had a call. They want to move their deposit to hold a weather backup for the outdoor ceremony, but they were particular about the PR language we use if guests ask. They don't want anyone thinking the family is somber." I let out a breath that might have been a laugh if it had less iron in it. "We'll handle the script." As we finished, I lingered by the vestibule. One of the catering associates had the radio on low. The station cut from a soft piano ad into a news brief, a local human interest piece about community support for a family who lost an infant. It wasn't the Fairmans. The city is big, and sorrow is not a limited commodity. But the timing made the hair on my arms rise. On my way back to the car, the rain eased for half a block. Across the street, a florist struggled under an armful of white ranunculus, petals bruising where plastic met softness. I thought of Clara's hands again, how she had folded them as if to keep something from spilling, how invisible she'd been made in a room where everything glittered. Back at the office, I laid the week out on a whiteboard, vendor claims, Plan B diagrams, comms templates, a bolded line that read, "Staff briefing sensitivity." I told myself I was doing it for my team, for the event, for optics. Underneath that, a question I couldn't file. Why would anyone talk about a wedding in the middle of a funeral? Here's the truth I've learned. Weddings aren't just about love. They're about power. Who has it? Who wants it? Who pretends it's theirs by right? Funerals strip the room. The masks slip. If a mother can reframe her grandchild's death as administrative relief, the wedding she's building with her other daughter is not a celebration. It's a stage. That night, before I shut down the office, I opened the Fairmen folder and scrolled to the first note I'd typed after that initial meeting. Clara, sister, not involved. I added one more line beneath it. Correction. Everyone is involved. Some people are just being written out. There are jobs you take for the paycheck, and there are jobs you take because walking away would invite too many questions. This was both. 2 days after the rain-soaked service, I got a terse email from Celeste's mother. "We need a private tasting at the estate. Same florals as the wedding mock-up. Soft lighting, no somber tones. Send staff who understand discretion." It wasn't phrased as a request. It never was with her. The date? The afternoon of the funeral? Not the day after, not later in the week. Hours after a white coffin had been lowered into the ground. I've staged tastings in odd circumstances before. A bride sampling canapés in a hospital waiting room. A groom insisting on wine pairings during a snowstorm. but nothing quite like this. Still, I sent my most tactful crew and arrived early to make sure the tone was celebratory, as instructed. The caterers were already unloading. Trays of prosciutto-wrapped figs, towers of mini eclairs, crystal flutes for champagne that hadn't yet been poured. The dining room had been reset from morning black to afternoon gold. Candles in mercury glass. Roses tight in their vases. Linen pressed without a single crease. From the outside, it looked like any high-end pre-wedding function. If you didn't know what the family had been doing 3 hours earlier, you'd think the day had been designed for joy. The guests trickled in wearing the same clothes they'd worn to church, only now the expressions were looser, glasses raised, voices pitched for laughter. The conversational center of gravity orbited Celeste. Her dress fittings, the diamonds sparkle under natural light, the photo locations she'd shortlisted for maximum social reach. I kept my head down, checking the alignment of the centerpieces, rotating the flatware to exact angles. But my eyes drifted to the far end of the room. Clara sat by the window, away from the buffet and the laughter, a small plate untouched in front of her. The light from outside, muted by clouds, caught in her hair, outlining her in silver. She wasn't hunched or broken. She was still, as if holding her ground in a room that had already decided she was somewhere else. No one spoke to her. Not her mother, not her father, not Celeste. The space around her was a no-man's land of polite avoidance. Even when the conversation veered close, it bent away before it could touch her. Maybe you clicked out of simple curiosity. Or maybe, without realizing, you were looking for a quiet corner, where the words come gently, and silence has a place in the conversation too. I wrote this story with care, like stitching together memories, pain, and small truths, hoping that somewhere in it, you might see yourself. If that happens, even for a moment, stay. Listen for as long as you like. And if you feel like it, leave a little sign you were here. It doesn't have to be much. Sometimes a short comment, a tap on the like, or sharing it forward is more than enough to let someone know they're not alone. I've been in the wedding industry for 12 years. I've seen it all. Runaway grooms, mothers fainting in church, brides who demanded their bouquet be flown in from the other side of the world. But the Fairman wedding? That was different. It started with a phone call from a luxury events agency. High-profile family, the coordinator whispered like she was leaking a state secret. Old money. They want someone discreet, experienced, and adaptable. I should have known that adaptable meant willing to deal with a hurricane in human form. The first meeting was at the Fairman estate, 3 floors of white stone, tall columns, and a front lawn trimmed so perfectly it looked fake. Celeste Fairman, the bride, was already waiting in the sunroom, sipping champagne at 10 a.m. Her mother sat beside her, pearls at her neck, diamonds on her wrist. The two were almost a mirror image. Same blonde hair, same perfect posture, same air of practiced superiority. I introduced myself, pulling out my tablet. So, tell me about the vision for your big day. Celeste leaned forward, eyes bright. It needs to be unforgettable. Think Italian garden meets French chateau. White doves, live harpists, maybe a champagne fountain? She spoke fast, layering ideas like she was building a cake without checking if it could stand. Every few minutes, her mother would nod and say, "Perfect, darling. We'll make sure you get everything you deserve." Every U was like underlining Celeste's name in red ink. There was another woman in the room. She sat quietly in the corner, hands folded in her lap, wearing a simple navy cardigan. She looked normal. No pearls, no diamonds, no champagne flute. I assumed she was an assistant or maybe a cousin. But when I asked, "And you are?" the mother's voice cut in before the woman could answer. "She's Clara," she said flatly. "Celeste's sister. She's not involved in the planning." Not involved. The phrase hung in the air, cold and dismissive, and for some reason it stuck with me. The meeting went on. Floral arrangements, color palettes, a seating chart designed to avoid unpleasant relatives. I jotted notes, nodded, smiled, did my job. But my eyes kept drifting to Clara. She didn't speak, didn't interrupt, didn't even sip her water. She might as well have been invisible. And then, just as I was packing up, it happened. The mother leaned toward one of the household staff, who had stepped in to clear the champagne glasses. She didn't lower her voice enough. "Don't bother with her," she said, flicking her eyes toward Clara. "She's not important. Just focus on Celeste." It was the kind of casual cruelty that doesn't even pause to check if anyone's listening. And I was listening. I'd worked with overbearing mothers before, but this was different. There was something deliberate in it, like erasing someone with a single sentence. Clara's eyes didn't even flicker. She just stood, murmured a polite, "Excuse me," and left the room. The door clicked shut behind her, but for me, that click was the first crack in something I couldn't yet see. At the time, I told myself it was none of my business. But I've been doing this job long enough to know, when a family has a shadow like that, it always finds its way into the wedding. And in the Fairmans' case, the shadow was already moving. 3 months before the wedding, Celeste's calendar started slipping like silk through my fingers. I noticed it first in the shared timeline I kept for all A-list clients. Tasting moved, dress fitting pushed, the floral mock-up bumped a week, then 2. Each change came with the same vague note from her mother's assistant. Family event, TBD. No context, no explanation, just a ripple that kept widening. I've learned not to pry. In my line of work, the fastest way to lose a client is to look curious. But quiet doesn't mean blind. The postponements knocked over vendor dominoes. Harpists have tours. Photographers juggle 3 brides a weekend. Florists need to confirm freight. If I didn't understand the size of the rock hitting the water, I couldn't predict where the waves would break. I called in favors, the soft kind that don't leave fingerprints. A maitre d' I've known since my intern days. The manager of the bridal atelier who owes me for steering a celebrity to her racks. She was describing a gown with a train so long it could hide a small army, holding court like a reigning queen. Her mother beamed, topping off her glass with practiced flourish. In the corner, Clara's hand moved, just once, to adjust the cuff of her sleeve, then stilled again. I was repositioning a candle when I looked up and found her watching me. Our eyes met across the room. It wasn't the brittle, glassy stare I've seen from the newly bereaved, nor was it a plea for rescue. It was something heavier, more deliberate, a ledger being balanced, a truth weighed against the silence around it. And then, as quickly as it locked, the moment broke. She shifted her gaze back to the window, the world beyond the estate. I returned to my work, but the image stayed with me. Clara framed by glass, her reflection caught against the gray afternoon, sitting in the middle of her own family and yet entirely outside it. The tasting went on for 2 more hours. There were toasts to love, to new beginnings, to what really matters in life, each one punctuated by a glittering laugh from the head of the table. The word Eve was never spoken, not once. When I finally packed up, I walked past Clara's chair. The plate in front of her was still full. She didn't look up, but I caught the faintest trace of lavender in the air, an echo of something softer, out of place among the heavy perfumes and the scent of champagne. Outside, the sky had begun to clear, but the ground was still slick with the day's rain. I loaded the van, my crew chattering about tips and traffic, and all I could think was, a wedding is supposed to gather a family. Here, it was quietly teaching me which parts of this family had already been cut away. It came 3 days later, tucked between an invoice approval and a note about the seating chart. A text from Mrs. Fairman. No greeting, no sign-off, just instructions. When you arrange the bridal prep space at the estate, use Clara's room. She won't need it anymore. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Maybe it was a typo. Maybe she'd meant the guest suite or one of the smaller salons they sometimes repurposed for events. Still, it was odd. Clara didn't strike me as someone who'd volunteer her room for a bridal war zone, especially after what I'd seen at the tasting. I typed back, "Just confirming. You mean the room upstairs with the pale yellow wallpaper? The one next to the nursery?" The reply came faster than I expected. Yes. That was Eve's room. It's empty now. Perfect for Celeste's prep. There was no hesitation in the words, no cushioning of the blow. Just the bare, factual cruelty of turning a nursery into a dressing room without a flicker of awareness for what it might mean to someone. I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair. I've worked with cold clients before, but there's a difference between someone who's efficient to the point of bluntness and someone who treats loss like a furniture shuffle. Evening. I hadn't heard the name spoken by anyone in that house. Not at the tasting, not in passing. Only from Lydia at the church, and now from her grandmother, as part of an interior design plan. I pulled out my project binder and flipped to the estate layout. The nursery was labeled in pencil from my first site visit. Sunny corner room, white crib, delicate mural of clouds and swallows across the far wall. I remembered the faint scent of lavender when I'd walked past it that day, and how the door had been ajar just enough to suggest it was lived in, not staged. Now it was perfect for a makeup chair and garment racks. I made a note in the margin. Clara's reaction? Watch. It wasn't part of the official event log, but over the years I've learned to track the currents under the surface. They tell you when a storm's coming before the sky changes color. That afternoon, I visited the estate to check lighting in the main hall. As I climbed the stairs, I passed the nursery door, closed this time. I hesitated, then knocked lightly. No answer. The air was still, but I caught the faintest shift of shadow under the gap. Someone was inside, not moving. Before I could decide whether to speak, Celeste's voice floated up from the landing below. "Alina, we'll need more mirrors for the prep room. Full length, not those cheap ones. It has to photograph well." I turned away from the door and met her at the top of the stairs. "Understood. We'll source them." She was already scrolling her phone, not looking at me. "Mom said we can use Clara's room. It's bigger, better light." "Right," I said carefully. "And is Clara okay with that?" Celeste shrugged. "She doesn't need it. She won't be here that day anyway." The way she said it, casual, absolute, made something tighten in my chest. I thought of the look Clara had given me by the window during the tasting, the weight in her eyes. If she knew her niece's room was about to be repurposed for a bridal photo shoot, what would that look become? Back in my car, I sat for a long moment before starting the engine. My job was to plan weddings, not referee family politics. But politics has a way of spilling onto the aisle whether you invite it or not. I added another note to the binder. Nursery to prep room. High emotional risk. Document. And under it, in smaller letters, "This isn't just a wedding. It's a rewrite. Someone's trying to erase a chapter." The email came in on a Tuesday morning, tucked between floral invoices and a request from the cake designer about sugar pearl quantities. No subject line, no sender name I recognized, just a single attachment and a line of text. while her sister held her child's ashes. Curiosity beat caution. I opened the file. It was a photo I'd seen once before, though never this way. Celeste and her mother, standing at the edge of the engagement venue's terrace, pearls glowing in the late afternoon light, glasses raised in mid-toast. Both were smiling, wide, glossy, made-for-publication smiles. The background was blurred, artfully enough to hide the guests, but sharp enough to catch the gleam of gold cutlery and champagne bottles in ice. Someone had overlaid the caption in stark white letters at the bottom. While her sister held her child's ashes. It was a knife dressed as a headline. I stared at it, my mind running through the unspoken rules of my industry. Keep scandals contained, control the optics, never let private grief collide with public celebration. Whoever sent this had ripped those rules to shreds and mailed the pieces to me. An hour later, the damage broke surface. The same photo appeared in the City Gazette's lifestyle section, not as an ad, but as a gossip column spread. The tone was coy enough to skirt libel. Questions swirl after a family's high society celebration coincided with a private tragedy. But the implication was clear, and the reader comments made sure no one missed it. Some accused the paper of cruelty. Others went for the jugular, dissecting Celeste's smile, her mother's jewels, the absence of any mention of the loss. By lunch, the story had bled into social media. A local influencer reposted it with the caption, "Read the room, people." Another tagged it number engagement glitz while sister grieves. I should have been drafting a damage control plan for the wedding. That's what a good planner does, buffer the event from the chaos. But instead, I found myself wondering, who took the photo? Who sent it to me? And why me, of all people? It didn't take a conspiracy board to see the most likely answer. Clara. She had been invisible in every scene I'd witnessed so far, but invisibility is a kind of camouflage. If she'd stood apart at the engagement, if she'd been watching instead of participating, she could have had the perfect line of sight. Still, the move was bold, almost reckless. Photos like this don't just sting. They rot reputations from the inside. And once they're public, they never disappear. Whoever released it knew exactly where to cut. That evening, as I packed up the office, my assistant asked if we should address the gossip in vendor calls. I hesitated, then said, "Not yet. Let's watch. This might be a one-day flare." But in my gut, I knew better. This wasn't random scandal chasing. This was a first strike, and first strikes usually mean there's a war plan waiting in the wings. It was late enough that most cafes had already flipped their chairs onto tables, but this one, a narrow corner spot with mismatched mugs and a barista who didn't mind lingering customers, still glowed in the drizzle. Clara was already there when I arrived. No pearls, no designer coat. Just a charcoal sweater and a paper cup she wasn't drinking from. She didn't stand to greet me, just motioned toward the seat across from her. "I'm sorry to drag you out at this hour," she said, "I'm sorry to drag you out at this hour," she said, voice even. I slid into the chair, setting my bag at my feet. "You said it was important." She studied me for a long moment, the kind that makes you aware of every move your hands make. Then she asked, without preamble, if a wealthy family lost their public reputation, what would their vendors do? It wasn't framed as hypothetical. There was no could or might. It was when, wrapped in polite grammar. I leaned back, choosing my words. "That depends on the vendors, but in my experience," I met her gaze. "They'd pull out, quietly. No one wants to be associated with a scandal that could stain their own brand, especially if it's messy enough to make headlines." She didn't nod, didn't take notes. She just absorbed it, like a stone sinking straight to the bottom of a lake. There was no grief in her face, not the puffy-eyed, raw-nerved kind I'd seen at funerals, anyway. If grief was there, it had been pressed flat and forged into something sharper. Vendors hate risk, I added. All it takes is one big client walking away, and the rest follow. It's about perception, not proof. Her fingers tapped once against the cardboard of her coffee cup, slow and deliberate. Perception, she repeated softly. She didn't mention the photo in the Gazette. Neither did I. But the air between us was heavy with the knowledge that we both knew why we were here. After a beat, she stood. Thank you for your time, Alina, and for answering directly. I started to say, anytime? But she was already pulling her hood up against the drizzle, disappearing into the street without looking back. I stayed there a while longer, listening to the hiss of the espresso machine, the scrape of chairs on tile, the hum of rain against the window. By the time I left, I knew two things for certain. Clara wasn't asking out of idle curiosity, and whatever she was planning, the wedding had just become the stage. The final stretch before a wedding is always a controlled sprint. Every vendor confirmed, every delivery timed to the minute, every small crisis smoothed before it reaches the bride. But the Fairman wedding's last 2 weeks didn't feel like a sprint. They felt like a string being cut, one knot at a time. The first came on a Monday morning, tucked into my inbox like any other update. Subject: cancellation, gold Chiavari chairs. The email from the rental company was apologetic but firm. They were uncomfortable with recent press and would be unable to fulfill the contract at this time. I read it twice. The recent press could only mean the gossip column. Someone had taken one photo and turned it into a slow poison. I called immediately, offering to pay a premium to keep them on board. The owner's voice was polite but unyielding. It's not the money, Alina. It's the association. We have to think about our brand. By Wednesday, the florist followed suit, not canceling, but doubling their price overnight. The official reason: unprecedented supply issues. The real reason hummed underneath every carefully chosen word. They didn't want their name attached to whatever cloud was gathering over the Fairmans. Thursday morning, the DJ texted to say he was down with a fever and couldn't make it. Hours later, the MC called to regretfully withdraw for personal reasons. The coincidence was too perfect to be chance. I sat at my desk, staring at the mounting list of gaps in the program. In 12 years, I'd weathered venue floods, catering strikes, and bridal meltdowns that could have been televised. But I'd never seen vendors scatter like this without a single direct threat. It was as if the whole network had smelled smoke and decided not to wait for flames. There's a certain rhythm to sabotage. It doesn't announce itself with one dramatic act. It's a quiet drip, 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 each drop eroding the surface until it buckles. I thought of the late-night cafe meeting. Clara's question: if a wealthy family lost their public reputation, what would their vendors do? Echoed in my mind. This wasn't bad luck. Someone was pulling the thread, and they were doing it with precision. I updated my contingency chart, filling the gaps with backups and substitutions, all while wondering how many more pieces would fall before the day arrived. Weddings are supposed to be about control, the illusion that for a few hours, nothing can go wrong. But with every new email, the Fairman wedding was starting to feel less like a celebration and more like a siege. The rain didn't just fall that morning. It attacked. Sheets of water blurred the view beyond the estate gates. Gusts of wind tore at the floral arch until half the roses were scattered across the gravel. The harpists had been moved inside, the aisle runners taped down like they were bracing for a flood, and I was pacing between the ballroom and the main hall with a radio pressed to my ear, juggling late arrivals and missing table cards. Front entrance. Front entrance needs you, my assistant crackled through the line. Now. I turned the corner toward the vestibule and froze. Clara was standing in the doorway, rain beating on her coat, hood down, hair damp but perfectly still against her shoulders. No umbrella, no +1. She didn't move until the usher stepped aside, and then she walked, not hurried, not hesitant, across the marble toward the gift table. She carried a small, square velvet box, the kind that might hold a necklace or a watch, deep burgundy against her pale fingers. Without breaking stride, she set it down among the silver-wrapped parcels and embossed cards. "Open it after the ceremony," she said. Her voice carried in the hush, calm enough to sound rehearsed. "It's a blessing." Every conversation in the room died. The murmur of rain on the windows seemed louder. At the head of the aisle, Mrs. Fairman had risen from her seat, the color draining from her face. But with 2 photographers near the mantel and a pair of videographers roaming the crowd, she didn't dare cross the room. Not here. Not now. From where I stood, I could see the flicker of something in her expression, panic trying to disguise itself as composure. Celeste, radiant in her gown, stood frozen near the dressing room doorway, bouquet limp in her hands. Her eyes darted from the box to her mother, as if waiting for a cue. None came. Clara glanced around the room, not to seek approval, but to mark the faces, like someone taking inventory. Then she turned, walked back toward the door, and stepped into the downpour without looking back. The usher moved to follow, but I caught his arm. "Leave her," I murmured. "She's not here for you." I watched her cross the drive, coat flaring in the wind, until the rain swallowed her. When I turned back, the box was still sitting there, small, silent, and impossibly heavy. I didn't know what was inside, but I knew this much. Whatever it wasn't meant to bless anyone in that room. I didn't see it happen. I was in the west corridor, negotiating with the caterer about whether we could delay the entree service another 15 minutes without ruining the beef, when one of the bridesmaids burst through the side door, heels in hand, mascara streaked like she'd just come in from the rain. "You're not going to believe this," she gasped, grabbing my arm. "The box?" "What about it?" "They opened it in the middle of the speeches." Her voice dropped to a half-whisper, as if speaking the details too loudly might make them more dangerous. It had Eve's birth certificate," she said. "And a letter for her first birthday, still sealed, never opened, a tiny heart-shaped necklace, and a card." She closed her eyes for a second, then recited it word for word. "You could have loved her. You chose not to. Now she walks with me, and shame walks with you." The hallway seemed to narrow around us. "What happened after they read it?" I asked. "Mrs. Fairman?" The bridesmaid shook her head. "She went white, then ran for the restroom. I heard her throwing up. Mr. Fairman slammed his glass down so hard it shattered. Celeste, she just sort of froze. Then she fainted, right there in the middle of the floor. And nobody caught her." The last part came out like a confession, as if failing to catch her had been its own kind of crime. From somewhere beyond the corridor, I heard the muffled sound of the MC fumbling through an improvised joke, the clink of cutlery trying to pretend the air hadn't just turned poisonous. But under it all, there was a different hum. Quiet, electric, the sound of every guest at every table whispering the same thing in different words. "Did you hear? Did you see? Is it true?" The bridesmaid looked past me, toward the front door, as if half expecting Clara to reappear. "She's not coming back, is she?" "No," I said. "She's already done what she came to do." The girl nodded slowly, then slipped back into the ballroom, leaving me alone in the corridor with the sound of the rain against the windows and the image of a small velvet box sitting on a table, its contents scattered like shrapnel. Some gifts you unwrap, others unwrap you. By the time winter gave way to spring, the Fairman name was no longer the kind you spoke with reverence. It started with a quiet line in the business section. Fairman and Daughters Law Firm closes amid ethics review. The article was clinical, dates, filings, official statements, but I could read the emptiness between the words. No partners stepping in to take over. No rebranding. Just a shuttered office and a brass plaque removed from the door. In the weeks that followed, Mrs. Fairman's name vanished from society pages. Where she used to be front row at charity galas and museum openings, she was suddenly absent. A colleague in events whispered to me that her invitations had been politely retracted by half the city's committees. Too much baggage, too much noise. And Celeste? The last I heard, she'd canceled her honeymoon for personal health reasons. Then, one rainy Tuesday, her wedding gown appeared on an upscale resale site described as never worn outdoors, pristine condition, serious buyers only. The asking price was half what I knew she'd paid. I didn't think about them often. Not directly. The wedding folder sat in my archives, red tabs bristling like tiny warnings, but I never opened it again. Some events are better left as closed cases. Then one Saturday at the farmer's market, I saw her. Clara was sitting beneath an old apple tree at the edge of the craft stalls, a paper cup of cider in her hands. Her husband was beside her, leaning back on one elbow, reading something on his phone. Between them, on the picnic blanket, sat a small ceramic urn the color of morning fog. I knew without asking. We made eye contact across the distance. She didn't wave me over, didn't mouth a thank you, didn't offer any explanation. She just smiled, faint, steady, and entirely at peace. It wasn't the smile of someone who had won. It was the smile of someone who no longer needed to fight. I walked on, but the image stayed with me. Clara under the apple tree, the urn catching the sunlight, the air around her somehow untouched by the noise that had swallowed her family whole. That's when I understood. Silence isn't always the end. Sometimes it's the sentence, and for those who've earned it, it lasts a lifetime.